So now we're going to talk about Module 45, Antisocial Relations. So what is prejudice? Prejudice is an unjustified and generally used negative attitude towards a group and its members. So it's an attitude, whereas discrimination is a behavior. It's an unjustified behavior selectively applied to members of a group. A stereotype is a generalized belief about a group applied to every member of the group. So you can see there's obviously things that are in common, but here the big difference is prejudice is an attitude, discrimination is a behavior, and stereotype is a belief. So the common components of prejudice involve beliefs or stereotypes, emotions, and predisposition to act, or so the behavior. So levels of prejudice can change. You can see here they've plotted levels of support for interracial dating in terms of percentage on the y-axis and the year and the x-axis. And you can see that across the board, those born before 1928 have very little support for interracial dating. It goes up slightly with those born before the Second World War. Then the baby boomers born after the war have, the majority of them support interracial dating. And then almost all of Generation X and now Generation Y, which is your generation, support interracial dating. So there still remains prejudice in our society, especially about gay marriage. We now see prejudice toward Muslims in our country, especially after 9/11. There's still prejudice towards women. Women are judged differently as opposed to men. And we do have automatic, subtle, and institutional prejudice that still occurs even when people state that they have no prejudice in principle, but may have unconscious prejudice reactions. So even though we all say we are not prejudiced, we may have these subtle, automatic kind of prejudices that we might not be aware of. They did an experiment where they showed people's faces of different races, so black, white, Asian. And when people were shown a black face right before looking at a tool, they perceived them seeing a gun as opposed to a wrench when it was followed by a blank or visual screen. So there's also prejudice based on gender. So people may prefer a feminine face. So if you look at the two faces on your right, it's the same fellow. But the guy on the top is more feminized than the guy on the bottom, and which one is more appealing to you? For me, it's the person on the top. But this doesn't counteract gender prejudice. For example, there's a preference for male babies. In some countries, there's even abortion or infanticide of females. In some countries, women are blamed for adultery. And in our country, we do view men and women different in terms of their behavior. So being assertive in a man is seen as ambitious and attractive, but can be seen as abrasive in women. So one way that we perceive other people is in an in-group and out-group kind of way, us versus them. And so even if people are randomly assigned to groups, so if I was to take you and randomly assign you to group A or group B, part of our natural drive is to feel a belonging to our own group, so an in-group bias, and therefore we misjudge other groups and quickly categorize them as you're either with me or you're against me. And you've probably seen this, and they give the example of football teams, but you know, I live right smack in the middle of New Jersey, and so half the people are Eagles fans, half the people are Giants fans, and there's a lot of animosity between people. So even just determining who your favorite team is, you can see that people, you know, see themselves as similar if they're all Giants fans, or dissimilar if somebody is an Eagles fan. So what are the emotional roots of prejudice? So there's a scapegoat theory. That's the observation that when bad things happen, prejudice offers an outlet for anger by finding somebody to blame. Experiments show a link in that prejudice increases during temporary frustration and decreases when experiencing loving support. And so it might be linked to fear. And so prejudice seems to be absent in people with inactive fear responses in the amygdala. And it's often true because I'm sure if in situations where you're feeling more unsure or more uncomfortable or more fearful, you tend to perceive others around you in a more negative kind of way than if you're feeling more relaxed and more happy. So some of the cognitive roots of prejudice involve forming categories, the power of vivid cases, and then the just world belief. So what is the other race effect? We are very hypersensitive to differences. So as seeing mixed race faces belonging to an other group. So which faces in this picture here are 80% Chinese and 20% Caucasian, and 60% Chinese and 40% Caucasian. So you can see the ones that the white people said that it was, if you go back, these faces that were mostly Chinese, but in reality it was actually these two faces. And so we tend to see uniformity in the appearance of other groups, and we assume similarity in traits, and so we're based on stereotypes. We also are judged based on vivid cases, and so I see this a lot because I do sex offender research, and we find that a lot of cases of sex offenders reoffending actually appear in the media, so people think that sex offenders reoffend at really high rates. However, of all convicted sex offenders, only about 15% at a maximum will actually reoffend. Using this example here, we have Islam, which is a huge number of people, and we have terrorism, which is also a very much smaller number of people, and the overlap between those who are Muslim and those who are terrorists is actually quite small, although now, because of the 9/11 attacks, we associate being Muslim with being a terrorist, which is led to a lot of prejudice. Some people also have the belief that the world is just, and the just world belief means that believing in justice generally happens and that people get the benefits and punishments that they deserve. So if people are rich or privileged, they must have earned it, and if people are poor outcasts, they must deserve better. And so believing that justice happens leads to blaming the victim. So these are things that can impact the way we view things. So the availability heuristic, or stereotypes that are built on vivid cases rather than statistics. Confirmation bias, we look for things that support our stereotypes rather than things that disconfirm it. The hindsight bias, they should have known better, so blaming victims for misfortunes. And cognitive dissonance, my culture, my family treats minorities this way, therefore it cannot be wrong. So let's change gears and talk a little bit about aggression. So the definition of aggression is behavior with the intent of harming another person, but it can have many forms and purposes. It can be physical, verbal, or relational, like punching, shooting, or betraying somebody. It can be planned, or it can be reactive. It can also be driven by rage, or it can be a coldly calculated means to an end. So it can be like you're in a bar fight and you get upset and you hit somebody, or it can be like a hitman who goes and kills somebody for $100,000. So what is the biology behind aggression? So there's not really one genetically universal style or amount of aggressiveness in human behavior, but there's a lot of variation in terms of levels of aggression, and things that explain that are genetic factors, including heredity, neural factors like brain activity, and biochemistry, including hormones and alcohol. And so there's evidence that aggression is tied to genes, even if we're not sure which ones, because we can selectively breed animals for aggression. For example, some dogs are bred for fighting, and then these characteristics are passed on to the next generation. Identical twins are more similar in levels of aggression than fraternal twins or siblings who share. Identical twins share, their genes because they were one egg split into two. And males are more prone to aggression and differ than females by a chromosome. There's also neural influences, and so there's evidence of brain links to aggression because one monkey learned to subdue the aggression of another by turning on an electrode implanted in the aggression-inhibited brain area. A woman became rude and violent after painless stimulation of her amygdala, and underactive frontal lobes, which inhibit impulses, are linked to aggression and violence. So we do know that testosterone has been linked and is positively correlated with irritability, assertiveness, impulsiveness, and low tolerance for frustration. And things that are linked to testosterone are things like facial width, and they're also linked to aggressiveness. So we do there is some evidence that violent criminals have high testosterone levels along with low serotonin levels, which are the kind of calming hormones. And so by reducing testosterone, we actually can reduce aggression in both animals and humans. Now, alcohol may also chemically or psychologically make people more likely to disinhibit aggressive behavior. You know, you see people behave in ways they wouldn't appear when they were sober. They become more aggressive in response to frustration when they're drunk. We do know that a lot of violent crimes involve the use of substances. And then rather than making peacemaking options when drinking, people tend to have violent reactions. And they interpret neutral acts like somebody bumping into them in a bar in a much more hostile kind of way. So there are also psychosocial factors that are related to aggression, which are influences by, you know, feeling frustrated in negative conditions, being reinforced for bad behavior, having aggression modeled at home or in the media through television or video games, or adopting social script from a cult for aggression through culture and the media. So, aversive or unpleasant conditions. So when we're waiting in line, you know, who doesn't become agitated? And we also find that when people are hot, we see increases in their level of violence. So when the air conditioning breaks down, people tend to be more agitated. When people are feeling pain or their foul odors tend to also result in more aggression. So this is called the frustration aggression principle. After repeated frustrating events, anger can build and find a target, and then aggression can erupt, possibly against somebody who is not the initial cause of the frustration. So I don't know if that's ever happened to you. You just had a bad day, one thing after another. You come home and then you blow up at your significant other, your parents, your children, even though they're not the ones that have caused you the anger, but because they are there and you've had frustration building all day. Aggression has also been found to be reinforced and rewarded. So sometimes aggression works. So bullies can win control and obedience. Robbers can gain wealth. And then tacklers who injure receivers get bonuses. And so that encourages aggressive behavior. And so, so if you have children who are engaging in aggressive behavior, you can actually decrease it by rewarding pro-social behaviors that still meet their needs, and therefore that the aggression will decrease because they can meet their needs through other means. So we do have family cultural models for aggression. So parents dislike aggressive behavior in their children, but unfortunately they modeled such behavior, like yelling at them, and therefore that's how their kids are learning to behave themselves. And so therefore it's important that we as parents exhibit the kind of behaviors that we want our children to display. Some cultures model aggression and violence as a solution to personal and societal injustice. And we also learn them through media and social scripts. So we do have a lot of aggression now in our music, books, and other media like video games. And we learn these scripts. And so confronted with new situations, we might rely on these scripts and then prescribe and may engage them in aggression. So one study exposed individuals to aggressive behavior, and so watchers of TV crime see the world as more threatening. If they were randomly assigned to watch explicit pornography, participants suggested shorter sentences for rapists and accepted the myth that victims may have enjoyed the rape. So we do definitely can be influenced by these social scripts. There's a lot of controversy about the media effects on aggression. But we do know that exposure to violence in the media, especially in pornography, seems to increase rather than release male aggressive impulses. And so, you know, males think that they can, you know, release some of that aggression through pornography, but actually increases their aggression. It can also portray minorities, women, and the poor, and others as being less powerful and weak and stupid, therefore being deserving of victimhood. One of the more recent controversies is the use of aggression in video games, and they randomly assigned people to play ultra-violent video games, and they found that those that played these violent games increased their hostility. People who played a game helping each other showed increases in real-life helping. And people have actually acted out violent acts from video games, so people playing the most violent video games tended to be the most aggressive. But what came first, the aggressiveness or the video games? Because one of the arguments is that people who are more naturally aggressive tend to choose to play these games. But this research suggests that even, by random assignment, playing such games can make people more aggressive. And so there are lots of different origins of aggression. There can be cultural and social influences, biological influences, and psychological influences, and they all come together to cause aggressive behavior. So there's not